Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. This is our FileMaker STL May 22 meetup. And we have a great guest. She has been around the country, virtually speaking, about various topics. And the one that caught my attention had to do with JSON. We're seeing JSON in all different corners of FileMaker development and integrations that we're reaching out to. And Beverly, when she and I were talking, and I've also viewed some of her presentations, past presentations, I thought we just got to get her here. So I'm so happy to have Beverly here to present her topic of JSON, Get Over the Fear. Beverly, take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, as you said, Beverly Voth of the Long O. I've been around FileMaker, I tell everybody, forever, professionally since version 2.1, but I actually have a floppy before Claris bought it. So that sort of tells you a little bit about me. I've done hosting provider, for everything web, full stack web developer, including SQL database management. So kind of all around on the web. So not just FileMaker, but other databases. I currently live in a forest, and it's near a famous waterfall that has a moonbow, and I'll let you look that up. I wrote a book and a bunch of articles. And
will you sign it virtually right now?
Oh, yes, of course.
I actually had it sitting right here on my desk.
Currently, I'm the membership lead for the Women Innovating Together. And, we just kind of have a safe space for women to exchange ideas. And they have ways to learn how to be leaders. And they have ways to, mentor each other and things like that in a safe space. So a couple things. I did a FileMaker booth at San Francisco Macworld, where I first introduced XML for themes. DevCon, I was a speaker a couple times, mostly the web and XML goodies. And I got a couple of those Crystal Awards. So kind of a pretty big deal for me, I guess. Okay, I did a couple of presentations already. One was at FM Disc and one was at Dig FM. And y'all have discussed JSON, so if I, go over something you already know, that's fine. Go ahead and ask questions in the chat, but after each section, I'll kind of stop and, make sure we clarify things. So JavaScript object notation is what JSON stands for. And it's just a text structure. And we know FileMaker eats text for breakfast. You can just do anything with text in FileMaker. I've been doing that for a long time. So it was pretty natural for me to do XML and web and everything, because they're all text formats. And the JavaScript is what throws a lot of people off, because then they get the feeling that they have to actually learn JavaScript to work with JSON. And we're going to check off that fear. No, you don't have to learn JavaScript. But you might want to, because it is a really valid way to read and write JSON. So basically, this presentation is to help you learn how JSON works in FileMaker, what things I've come up with to help me, and help you kind of ask questions about it if you've got a fear factor in there still. Let's see if we can get you over it. So the first presentation was how to read FileMaker, and I did what everybody does. So I don't quite understand this. I've got to figure out how to read JSON, and I'm reading all these articles, and I'm getting all these different widgets people made, and looking at all the custom functions. And there were some stops where things just weren't working for me. And you can have perfectly valid JSON, but some of these things were so narrow focused that they just didn't work. So of course I, did what everybody does and made me a little widget so I could actually understand what that key or index or path means in the functions. So once I then understood what that meant, I came up with another one and I said, okay, how can we use JSON, not just for the transfer of data back and forth, but what other ways can I use JSON? And I said, what if we sort of, make this little future jump now and make a field that would be just JSON. And so some of our storage is fields and some of it's in this chunk of JSON. So I'll demo those a little bit. In that, I talked a little bit about NoSQL, EAV, which is entity attribute value, and JSON query is a way to read. So this is kind of a quick overview. Okay, I've got a bunch of links for you. Uh-oh, not gonna let me paste in the chat.
Tell you what, Beverly, we can get you are going to share your file, I think, anyway, right?
Yeah,
that'll be available.
I am, but these links
Great.
aren't in there.
Oh, I can share them with the group and post them in our meetup group.
Okay, that'd be great.
Afterwards, yeah, I'll connect with you.
So I started from the very beginning, what's JSON? And we know that JSON can be kind of complex. So, just looking at the stuff that's out there, people right away say, oh no, I'm not going to work with that stuff. No way. FileMaker came up with some built-in functions, which helped. Again, at that point, everybody said, well, what does this mean? And how do I use it? And what do I do with it? So I studied that and some different ways of doing it. I even have links to my presentations. And there was a presentation at DigFN on Mongo database. And for those of you that don't know what Mongo database is, that's what Claris Studio and that's what Claris Connect will be using to store the data. It's not that we have to learn Mongo database, but we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. So why do we have to learn JSON, or why should we learn JSON? Because you don't have to, because the data API uses it and the execute FileMaker data API uses it. And that's really great. When you look at their format that they do, and it's pretty cool. Web viewer implementation, if you want to make data tables and graphs, there's a lot of JavaScript frameworks out there. Some of the add-ons use JavaScript already. And so helping you understand the JSON, again, you don't have to learn it, but if you look at it, you say, well, what is this? And you go, okay, that's not so bad. I get it a little bit. And of course, the built-in JSON functions and custom functions, and even some plugins that can help you a little bit along the way. So where else is it used? The insert from URL is where you're sending or receiving externally, uses JSON. Script parameters, we talked about passing those, and it could be table to table or even file to file, which I've used quite a bit. Data that is stored in MongoDB is what they call BSON, and it's a binary form of JSON. And again, it's not that we have to learn that. We don't have to be able to know what it is or how to access it, because FileMaker is going to, or Claris is going to give us a really easy way to get at the data that is stored for us. And they're going to call it ESS Plus. So it's just going to say, connect like we do now to any ODBC source, external source, and it'll be available. So we've got it easy again. And then, is JSON hard as working with XML? And I'll say no. It's much easier, actually. One, because we have built-in functions, and we don't have to actually get that complex in learning it and using it and calculating it like the XML needed to be. And NoSQL, what does NoSQL mean? It means basically any way to store data that isn't necessarily our old familiar columns and rows. And you go, what? No columns and fields, no rows or records? You know, how can I work with that? Well, there will be easy ways to do that. Again, I believe that they're fully going to give us, if they haven't done it, they will give us additional functions that we may need to help us do that. So it's going to be pretty easy. Again, we've got the ESS Plus, which is going to make it easy to actually read and write to the Mongo database. So we're still saying easy, no scary factor there. And I asked a question, is this kind of an alternate way of thinking? And I say, yes, it is, but it doesn't have to be difficult. We want it to be just what we love about FileMaker already, right? And remember, FileMaker Pro is not SQL either, but it is relational. So do we call it NoSQL? Maybe. Okay, so more about the worm and fuzzies. The world is changing because it always does. I mean, from 2.1, it certainly has changed how I work with the product. And we want to move with it, or we should move with it, but we want to do it in a way that we understand it and aren't thrown things that are going to make us say, no, I'm never going to do that. So it's really what my presentations have kind of been about, is trying to ease us into that way. Okay, it's okay to denormalize data or try to use JSON in a normalized way. It's whatever you want. Changing your current data modeling might seem impossible, but again, things have changed. You may not be data modeling the way you did when you first started. So it's okay to change, but just begin to think about it. How would I do something a little different? And we still want to keep that easy entry and easy reporting with our data, however we use it.
Quick question for you, Beverly.
Sure.
Oh, go ahead, Chad. You got it.
Yeah, I was going to interrupt for a second and say that on my screen share, I'm still seeing your handy links screen. I didn't really see you walk through those different slides that I think you were pointing to. And so I wonder if whenever you went to copy and paste, if something didn't get screwed up there, or maybe I'm the only one seeing it. Maybe everyone else is following along. But there we go.
Nope.
I see a warm fuzzy
Okay,
now.
it's
But
back. Yeah, it paused on me.
perfect. Thank you.
So go back.
Thanks, Chad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just text. Okay. All right, so let's look at the demos. This was the first one I did at FM Disk. And again, I wanted to be able to test JSON. So I had a way to paste it in. I had a way to, tell me what the paths were to read it. And so I could learn a few things, like objects are unordered lists, which means I can put it in there 1, 2, and 3. When I actually parse it out, it becomes an alphabetical or unordered, according to what we put in, set of data. And then when you go for an array, which is different, has a square bracket, it keeps that order regardless. So I've got a way to show you the actual path to get to this value would be the square bracket 0, because arrays use index. So the first one is index 0. And we want to find out what the value of this. We have to say the name of the element, which is 1, to actually get that element. And I'll show you the scripting here in a minute. So I put in there a way to format elements to show you that things sort of rearrange if it's an object. I did some tests on emojis just to see what would work or not work. We do that, right? We build things, what works. We had problems with dots and key names, but now with version 9.3 or greater, we've got a way to fix that. So that's called the bracket notation. And so if we've got an an element with a dot in the name, we can actually call it with what they call the bracket notation. And it's the square brackets again with a single quote around the element name, the object name. I tested returns in a field. It converts it for me, preserves it. So we're okay with returns against more arrays and square brackets, just values in quotes if they're text, not quotes if they're numbers, not quotes if they're the Booleans true or false, and not quotes if it's the null value. I did this with a bracket test to get to it. So let me show you how I did that. This is all scripts, functions that are just the JSON functions. I use no custom functions. Again, my intent was to learn what the path is, but also to give it to people so that they could say, oh, I get it, I understand. There's no JavaScript, there's no plugins. It's something that you could do if you took the time to do it. It's not even complex scripting. So once I paste in the JSON I want to test, I get it set up and I start to get the path. And it pounded through and automatically gave me that bunch of elements that are in that first level. So I'm going to get name, age, color, city, wife, and kids. And of course, it rearranged them alphabetically. If I want to know the age, I just bring the age over. I want to bring the city over, it tells me what it is. And I want to do color, tells me what it is. And all along the way, I'm testing each one of these values with the JSON get element function, the JSON list keys function, and the JSON list values function. Back up to, let's look at the calc on that. It just brought me everything. It listed the keys and it listed whatever values were in that whole set.
So in other words, just to recap that, Beverly, in this example, you have age, city, and color selected on the left-hand side.
Correct.
And that's showing you, that's breaking out all the keys and all the values that were even possible. Got it.
Correct. And I've seen other people do this, and I've seen other people, you paste in the JSON and they give you everything. And then you don't get that chance to step through and say, I just want to know this one. I want to know what the path is to actually get to color. It's just the word color. You start out with nothing, it shows you everything. Kids now happens to be an array. And so it gave me back the keys as 0 and 1. Again, here's JSON get element returned whatever's in that array. It listed the values that are in that array and the keys. So I use that to set up the 0 and the 1. If I want to get the age of that first child, color of that first child, and name of that first child. And these are all stored in another table. This is just related to the paths. And so just to get to the name Sarah, I had to use this path. So when I'm doing I want to get the element of my JSON, I had to know what that path to it was. So it'll say JSON get element, and then it'll say, what is your main JSON? And then it'll say, what is the key or index or path? And that's what the key or index or path is. I put a couple other little things in there just to give me clues that this was an object. Put in a clue of what it would look like if I were to actually have to write that out in a function to recreate this actual JSON. I do have a toggle for dot and bracket when I need to. Of course, that could be scripted. If you could reach an object that has a dot in it, then you could, just kind of automatically do that. I'm not even going to finish that out. And there it listed me. So just looking at the values, I've got an element, an array, that first index of the array, and that's going to be the kids, age, color, name. But to see the whole thing, I had to show the full path to know that I'm looking at the kids array out of order from where we had it, but that's fine because we're using the object, and only till we get to this point do we actually use an array. I kind of put in little clues to help you also see, what it is you're sort of dealing with. And to me, that helped me really understand. I got to the execute FileMaker data API, and it was the same thing, a mixture of elements, objects, and arrays. And sometimes they were nested, and you got down as far as the portal data. Here again, it's more nested, and so it could really kind of look complex and scary. And this little widget that I bought, built, was really meant to sort of help me understand. So if I'm getting a response back from the data API, I can do it for one row and know the pattern and know that the next time the next field data is actually going to be the next record. So in my index, it's going to be that next index. And then it's a little bigger. So my conclusions were out of this was that objects are an unordered list with the key, name, and value pair. It always comes in curly braces. If you have more than one within that curly braces, they're comma separated. And arrays are the ordered list of values that use the 0 index to start with the square brackets. And again, they're in a comma separated list if you have more than one value. But then you figure out, well, if I have an object with a value, an array with values, I can also have those values be other objects or other arrays. And that's where the complexity comes in. And I still come back to this and say, I'm not quite sure of that full path. I can read it and then say, kind of get lost. And so this sort of helped me. I tested emojis, I tested the square bracket, I tested returns, I tested the dot, I tested the data API, and this really, really helped me get that key or index or path. Okay, I'm going to go back to one now. Good one to choose. These are all brackets. So once I actually got this, all the path of all the elements for this particular JSON, I said, well, what if I wanted to write this again? So I came up with a routine, again scripted, that if I paste this now, refresh, copy it, and see if I can get the data viewer to come up. I paste that in there. It recreated the JSON that I had in my original. Of course, it's ordered, kind of funny because it starts with the object, which reordered it for me. But it's exactly all the values I had before.
That was a slick little trick you
Yeah,
did there.
yeah. And it doesn't, which is another thing I learned doing this, is I automatically tell it what kind of, I mean, help will say you just use double quotes. And I just automatically say, hey, I'm going to start with an array. I'm going to start with an object. I'm going to automatically put in what I want in there to start with. But the order of these, I mean, I can move things around. And if I did it again, it would come out exactly perfectly. So that kind of helped me a little bit too, to learn how to actually write that JSON set element. And I format it in the end, which, FileMaker doesn't care. It's going to change it.
Is this assuming, well, I guess it's based on the data right there too.
Yeah.
I'm noticing that age is 40 in quotes as opposed to a number or a numeric.
Yeah,
value.
and that was kind of me.
Mhm.
We're waiting. Now, I know Andrew announced that there's a new thing pending, which will give us the clue that if this was actually just a number, which numbers are not quoted,
Mhm.
that it would tell me that this is a number. So when I go back to recreate it, I'll be able to fix that. And right now, everything's a string, which,
Sure.
it doesn't know dates. Dates are a string. And if you're doing like the UUID as a number, it'll mess it up. You actually have to make it a string. So there are a couple gotchas that came along, and I said, you know what, for my purposes, just to kind of learn the path things, to learn how to write that function to create. I'm just going to leave it as strings right now, knowing that I'm going to come back to this if they get some new functionality that tells me what kind of value it is. The
That would
null,
be interesting,
same thing.
huh?
Boolean or null right now. Boolean, when it returns, it'll give you a 1 or a 0. Null, it'll just look like an empty string, which, if you really want to pass a null back to something, you have to have that keyword null. And I think the new functionality that they're going to give us will let me do that, which I thought was pretty cool.
Are you thinking that's the very next version that they were talking?
Yeah, I think so.
About? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
So not just the dot notation
Yeah,
fix, but also potentially interrogating the data.
right.
That's interesting.
Right. Knowing what that actual path is, or what that actual data type is, that it's either string or number or Boolean or null.
Great.
So, yeah. So,
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I
yeah.
noticed that and figured that was the case. You'd have to build it
Just,
pretty hard.
Just because it was, I mean, I probably could have taken the value and tested see if
Yeah.
it's a number. To me, it wasn't worth it, because I
No,
knew
like
I
you
wanted
said,
to learn the path, and it wasn't meant to
exactly.
be the be all end all. But there are other places that do that. So that was that one, and I'll make sure y'all can, get a copy of that. I got a couple more things on there, but I'm going to come back to some of the things about arrays. So I'm going to hide this window. So the next one is I really got wild. I said, okay, I know how to read it. I know how to write it. What can I do with it now? Kind of knowing that there are other places that are storing things in JSON, or like for Mongo, the BSON. So I said, well, why don't I just again learn a little bit about it more? Why don't I think ahead? There are some records that I have that, like invoices. Once an invoice is sent, it's not supposed to be changed. So what if I store the line items in just JSON? So it kind of led me to the next demo that I did for Dig FM. And again, you'll be able to watch the full video on that. So I just have a few fields. Of course, the auto enter, creation and stuff like that. But it's mostly just a few fields. And then the rest is the JSON field. And your user would never see that. So I was trying to come up with ways to make it all JSON so you can only edit this way. But I didn't really fully flesh that out. And I said, okay, now we want to make it easy to create the JSON. So I came up with, well, I can add some details by, just putting in a value. So I'm only going to pass a value. Or I want to do a bunch of objects, key value pairs. So I came up with a way to do that. And then I said, I want an array, which is again, that comma separated list of, numbers and text or whatever, and it'll be able to add them.
You said comma separated. Did you mean return delimited or?
No.
It is
In
comma.
JSON, they're stored as, in here, I've got it as return delimited.
Okay.
But
Cool.
when it's saved to JSON, good catch. When it's saved to JSON, it is comma separated. So that's what I did, is I just created a bunch of stuff. Then I had something that I call attributes, and that's where the entity attribute value comes in. And I want you to kind of notice something. This is one table. It has the main fields, but very different JSON information, which kind of gets you in that thinking of, oh, that's pretty cool. It doesn't care what I put in there. It doesn't have to be normalized. And I think that's the direction we need to sort of think about, is that if we're going to be dealing with JSON, it isn't necessarily going to be first name, last name. It may be we only have one piece of the data and not the other three. Well, the JSON's only going to store that one piece of information that we have, which is okay, because as we go to read it, if it exists, it's there. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't care. So, so one table with very different information in it.
So Valerie, in FileMaker speak, I'm going to take a stab at this.
Sure.
By using JSON, and in this case, you created a single field to store
Correct.
the JSON.
Correct.
Basically, a developer or whoever's, let's say the developer, they're not necessarily having to create all the possible fields to store the data.
Bingo.
Yay.
That's it.
All right.
Bingo. Yes. And let me show you then the attributes. Attributes was another way. And this is where we get in the entity attribute value. And I did it all wrong on this one for a reason. But basically, I could put in an entity, I could put in an attribute, and I could put in whatever that value was. And it's a table, but I didn't have to create those fields to store this information. Let me show you another one here. Same thing. Name first. I didn't have to put that particular field. I just stored in the JSON. And as I did the demo before, I said, at some point, I do want things to be consistent and normalized in a little way. So even if I use this, I may have a list of drop-down lists that I'm only going to allow name, I'm only going to allow phone for this particular type of data. And once I choose name, I can only do first, last, middle, whatever I want to do. And then also I said, once I've got those chosen and I go to enter my value, I can also validate against that. Say, if I know it's a phone, then I have to make sure that it's valid as a phone type. So just sort of like we do now, only it's not on a field, it's in, a packed JSON at this point. Once it's saved, it's just, again, a different sort of way of thinking that the Mongo database, that's how it's going to store things. And we don't need to know that. It'll give it back to us just fine as, phone home or whatever we label that particular field. And it'll also have validation for us automatically, but just trying to think ahead what we would do or could do. So then I did the format, which most of the time, it's human readable, sort of. But really, when FileMaker gets to the functions and starts using it, packs it back down again. And if your user's not going to see it, who cares, right? So I came up with, here's our easy way to do data entry. Just some different options of how to do it. And then I said, okay, now how do we read it? Well, we can use those things like I did when I was getting the path of something to get the actual value. But there is a custom function called JSON query. And here, let me show you what that looks like. And I can't show you all in Zoom it, but it's pretty complex. It's one function, it's recursive. And he has a whole demo. I'm gonna show you a sample of that in a minute.
That is so great that you're using that. I think it was me. I think I did a presentation on that, just a really quick intro
Yeah.
of JSON query in one of our previous meetups.
Well,
Fantastic that you're
he
using
has a
it.
way that he has a calc that he does. And I said, you know, I'm not just gonna write that out each time. So I kind of broke it down into, you know, fields. So the other thing that I noticed was that an array is very much like a value list table or virtual list table. So I have things that are events, details, and attributes. So if I look at the events, really the top elements are event, you know, something, details, and whatever that storage was, and attributes, whatever that storage was. And even though I have these as fields, I also put them in the JSON just so I had them. If I say just detail, I've taken that path and said, just show me the elements that are going to be in that details path. And it shows that to me. I said attributes, same thing. I can kind of use that virtual list table to actually look at some of that stuff in a very easy way. So I'm not sure where name first is. If I do a search, it's going to say no, it didn't show up using that custom function. Let's see if it's in details. It is. It's in details. Format that back out. Details. I actually have the element name first and it returned Beverly just fine. Well, I kind of got a little tricky here and also put it in attributes. So let's check that. And yes, it comes back. And you notice that he's got it around square brackets. And I said, well, that's kind of funny. Let me see. So I said, what about color? And this was the one where I had those attributes sort of weird. I've got the word color in here several places. Just to show you a bad way, because, you know, sometimes we're going to test the bad. I said, what about color? It's not going to show up in event. It's going to show up in details because I put it in there as an element, color blue, and that's what it returned, blue. But I also have it in attributes several places. It's not going to find me the striped dot color, and it's not going to find me the color dot striped. Let's see what it returns in attributes. Again, that's limiting the path. And it showed me two. So I said, oh, I get it. I understand why he's got it as an array of values that are returned, because you can't have more than one based on his query. And it's case sensitive. So if I say color, it's not going to return anything. But he's got some really cool functions that just make it work really well. So again, my whole point of that presentation, I encourage you to watch the whole video, was to kind of get you thinking about, you know, how can we easily use JSON, you know, to put the data in? How can we easily report on it? And I had a lot of questions after that where people were saying, okay, I get it, sort of. But show me a real world example, because these are just, you know, sort of random putting in stuff to see what works. So let's see if I can pull that back up. So I wrote one, and this is on the website for the actual presentation. So if you go to the group Dig FM on community, where my presentation is listed, not only is the video there, but the sample file is there. So I said, okay, let's do an invoice and do that same principle. We've got just some fields. Again, my auto enter fields are not being shown, but some fields and some JSON. Well, I'm not showing the JSON at all. So I put in a little thingy that, you know, kind of let me peek at it if I wanted to. And I can choose a new item. Let's see what's not in there. Hurricane lamp. I have to put in a quantity. I want 2 of them, and I can add it. And you notice that it automatically did the total, and it automatically changed the grand total. That's using the custom function. There's a sum function in it. It's pretty cool. If I remove it, again, it updated what my total was. If I want to change the value of something, I can't type in here because I use that virtual list.
I was just going to ask you about what's
Yeah,
under
it's
the
all
hood there.
calculated, so I can't change it.
Very nice.
I can't change it. It's using tab stops. So if you look at this in layout mode, it has tab stops to make the columns look like columns. And in fact, I did the headers that way too. I said, give me the first item that's in there, and I'm going to use the object name as the column headers. So this is kind of a calculated
That is pretty slick.
feature too. So if I, you know, if I have something else that has different headers, it's going to take whatever's there. But again, I had to match up the columns. So I made sure that these had the same tab stops. But if I want to edit, I had a way that I could actually edit just the quantity, because that's really all I want to be able to change. I updated, it updated price, total, and it updated the grand total. I actually didn't go real far with it. I did, but I wanted to have, here's a real world example of it. I think I've got like 3 different invoices. This has only got 1. But that virtual list table shows me what the actual array item is. And this is what it is calculated out with the tab stops. But in table view, it doesn't show the tab stops quite as well as like this. So that's what I did. And then I chose to actually just print the layout, you know, with some little nicer cleanup. And I could have done the same thing on a separate print layout where I would need to have more than just what would be showing in the portal. I said it's stored in the JSON, so why not? I can extract it for this. I can certainly extract it for a report. And that's my reasoning for doing that. Was I have some really complex reports that I do for clients that require me to grab this and grab that and grab that. And I said, you know, if I just would grab it and put it into JSON, some of it's going to be static and be the same each and every time. And some of it's going to be updated. And if I did it like that and just did a report, stored it as JSON, I wouldn't have to recalculate it each and every time. So I did that. But let's say this example is actually on that group page if you want to look at it. Had a couple notes on it. Somebody advised me don't be too overly eager to use the virtual list table. You get too many items and it kind of slows down, but that's fine. And then I'm going to show you his JSON query. Like say if you reviewed it, he has a little bit about information, some kind of reference on, what he's doing. I mean, it really was full feature. I have not even begun to touch on all the different stuff that he did with just this one function. But he gives you full examples of how to use it and what things are going to happen. So, a sum across the JSON, and it gives you a way to test it. It tells you the time that it took to run it. It gives you the results of that sum for that particular query. Again, I liked the way he did it, but I wanted to make sure it was much easier for us and in the end to be able to say, what is the path? What is the target path? What is the operator? And use a selection list for my use case. And then be able to put in what I want to do. And I want to sum, do I want to just return information? So. And I went through that pretty fast. So again, I encourage you to watch the full videos on the presentations. And I want to open it for questions and see what kind of things that you sort of have fears about. What can we do to say, be ready, it's coming, and let's make it easy.
Yeah, bring in your questions right here, right now with Beverly. I've got one, Beverly. I don't know if let me take a stab at it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you foresee I'm trying to figure out how to formulate the question. When you shoved the line items for the invoice into JSON, right? Into a single field. How could I do a report that would say, hey, give me all the invoices that have this product on it?
Yeah, and I thought about that too. And it could be that you're shoving them into another table with the whole JSON package, or you're using Steve's JSON query, and that would tell you if you're looking for all of them.
That's true. So you'd script it a little bit more, right? Like you'd run his query to get the results, but then find those records for the user. I like that idea.
And JSON is pretty good about if you just do find and it returned me 4 records with the word Bob in it. It's FileMaker. Your normal finds are going to do one thing, which is narrow down which records you're gonna search, which ones you're going to make a query against, and then you can use JSON query or like say JavaScript or whatever you want to do at that point. That we have the ability now to be able to make queries on it that was a lot harder before, but not so much. So I kind of wanted to come back to this and show you. My choice of thinking about doing that demo was just I did it really fast and didn't quite think all the way through it. But this is where I'm talking about people want to be normalized. And so you can have an array of arrays, right? And using the first index to give you your column names. And then each of the line items would be just the values that are in there. And I said, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense for people that really are paranoid and say, I've got to have it that way. So let's try it. This is what I actually did is I had an item object, which was an array, so that I can have multiple items in it. If you don't do that, you'll get an error. So using the word item more than once, and this only has one anyway, but if you use it more than once, it would say, you know, it won't take it. And then within that, I made an array of objects so that they were always in the same place. I really hated the thoughts of things getting rearranged on me. And yet I've come to love the other way. So
And by that, you mean that if we didn't use an array and we used a JSON object, FileMaker would alphabetize by
correct.
key.
And I've
correct?
got that in here.
Yeah.
So
Just
so
to
that's what I
hammer,
did.
hit that
Yeah. So
home.
alternately, I said, okay, I'm not going to put in the keyword items. I'm not going to put in the keyword item. Let's just make an array of arrays with those objects in it. So it's keeping the name with there. It won't reorder it. And then I said, okay, let's try it where I did like I did that first sample where the first part of the first index of the array is just the names. And, you know, whoops, jumped on me here. There we go. Using my trackpad. To get to that, darn it. To get to that actual value, I needed to know what the pattern was to get to it. And it doesn't tell me anything about it. It doesn't tell me like that was, that was the item number. So I thought, well, that really isn't a good way to do it. So I kind of went back with using that as the array of arrays, but one object for each item. And that's what it did. It reordered them for me. It, put that in that alphabetical order. Even if I had like an element with no name at all, that floated to the top. So when I
Is that
formatted.
I think I know the answer to this. Is that a FileMaker thing?
No.
Oh.
No, I use BB Edit for JSON checking, verification, and then there are other tools out there that you can paste your JSON and then it'll format it for you. BB Edit does it slightly different than FileMaker in the indenting, but it does the same order. And so it's a JSON thing. When you format it or you actually go to process that object, it'll reorder it.
I didn't realize that. The whole time I thought it was a FileMaker.
One of the things I discovered, and it kind of, so it really is up to you what kind of pattern you want. And I think I went back to, I don't necessarily need that keyword items, and I don't need that keyword item. I can do an array of arrays, but keep it as I had it. And I think part of the problem was when I was doing it, and I had a null value in there. It's perfectly happy putting a null value just like that within this array because it's just another index in that array. But when I actually changed it so that it was not an array of objects, I had to pass an empty object name because otherwise it gave me an error. So if I just tried to pass null, and I test it. Oops, nope. It won't let me do it.
Not able to parse that accurately.
Yeah.
Got it.
Let me back in. So, again, it's sort of thinking about, what works, when and why, and how easy it is to create it, how easy it is to get it back. What kind of pattern, if you want to set up your own, if you're using the data API, of course, it has its own pattern of things that it uses. But I kind of like that array of arrays and then each object within that array, again, for that reason, because you should supposedly be able to put in just, something that's not an object in an array item. So it can be a real mixture of items. Let me did that one already. I may have erased that one because it was an answer for a question somewhere, but
Well, Beverly, do you still have some time here for
I
a couple
do,
of
yes.
questions if we have
Yes.
some?
Yeah.
Folks, if you have questions for Beverly, please unmute yourself and fire away. This is a lot of heady stuff.
It is.
Mhm.
Again, my point was to say, yeah, it is, but it doesn't have to be. If you start with the basics and say, I'm going to figure out what that path is, then you go say it begins to make more sense of why we're using it. And then knowing that difference of what's an object and what's an array, and how do I want to preserve something if I pass it, I want to make sure that I keep a null. I want to keep a number as a number. Then you think about those kinds of things and how you might have to pass it.
One thing that Beverly and I got into as we were prepping and scheduling this meetup was definitely about the use cases. And I really liked that you showed us that invoice, that there may be a need for storing information and not changing it, not having those line items change. And so one reason, like, why would you shove a bunch of JSON into a single field?
Yeah.
And I shared with her that I wasn't really like looking for this. I actually stumbled on it as a concept. One of our clients has applications, like you fill out applications, and there are various
Right.
application types,
Right.
and their attributes vary from application to application. On the database end of things, we didn't think of JSON back then. We built out each of those tables and store all of those attributes. Well, our client said, now we want to create a web version. So we're using FM Better Forms as far as like the tool of choice in that case to create some nice responsive web pages. Well, the one thing that we wanted to do was not take data that a web user may have given us and shoved it directly into their production system. They wanted this staging process. And so the one thing that I just could not grasp was, do we really have to create a staging version of all of those tables and all of those attributes that are in existence in production? And I don't know, it's just a strike of luck, I guess. And I talked to one of our developers. I said, what if we took data from FM Better Forms that it hands off, and we took that raw data and just shoved it into a record, and we would call out the data as needed when someone needed to review the submitted data in the staging version before we push it on over to the real deal. And it turned out to be a real great success. It took a little while for us all to understand that, but we were afraid that if we made a what do I want to say, a schema change in production, then we'd have to always go to this other staging table and create the schema change there as well. And in this case, we really don't have to. We can just tell FM Better Forms, hey, there's this other attribute that we want to collect and shove it into this field. And yeah, it was when Beverly was showing what she had, I went, wow, I wish I had this meetup 2 years ago, Beverly.
Yeah. And again, it's just sort of thinking different, even if we never have to touch JSON in the new stuff. People are still going to wonder and want to know about it. I just was able to post one of the links, which was the MongoDB presentation by Chris Moyer that he did. If you want to know about Mongo, again, watch that. And we're not telling people that they have to learn Mongo, that they have to interact with it directly in any way, shape, or form. But people are scared because they don't know. You throw something new at me. I mean, the same thing happened with XML, and that's been a long time. And there's still some people say, I'm never going to work in XML, or they'll tell you, I'm never going to work on the web, but they're doing web direct. So you're like, okay, well, sorry, we got you easy way. And it's kind of the same way. It's just, we want people to feel comfortable with it. So if they want to know what the stuff is, then we certainly will, relay. It's not as bad as you thought it was.
Yeah, I appreciate that you sat down and worked out this teaching tool for yourself, but were willing to share it with everyone. And speaking of that, Beverly, what's the best way to distribute that file or let people know about your sample file?
I didn't know if you had a group, chat that you guys use
Yes, we
all the
do.
time.
We
Okay.
do.
So yeah, distribute it however that is.
Okay.
It's already gone out for the first presentation I did through FM Discs chat. It really hasn't been published, and I'm hoping for that new version to come along. And when that new version comes along, we'll have a little more full featured set, being able to know that it's
great.
a number instead of text and string. And I didn't necessarily want to just post it, until I got that.
Sure. So maybe we could coerce you to coming to one of the first hour sessions that we do in our meetup, early on, to just give us that update and go,
Sure.
Here we go. Here's what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Waiting on Claris.
Yeah.
So I'll be sure to post a link to get that file, copy of that file that you'd currently or that you had shared with me prior to this meeting.
Yeah.
And I'm checking our time. I want to be respectful of everyone. I didn't see any microphones come unmuted except maybe Witham. Did you have something there with them for Beverly?
Oh, I was just asking, would be a way to use one of these JSON arrays be to pack up all of the data from a database to, like, for instance, go from a hosted live copy to refilling another copy off somewhere? Like if you're working on the structure of the database and you want,
I don't know that I've done it with that much data, because you're talking about a pretty huge file. It's
Okay.
like, it would be like trying to export all of your tables into one table. But I certainly have done file to file transfers where I needed to, I'm working on this file. I need the data from that file. And there are probably more efficient methods as far as, the import, export, or the migration tool kind of thing. But when I need chunks of things that I needed to be saved, it certainly could be done that way, and it could certainly be unpacked. Just there are probably faster ways to do it than that, but it's possible. And that's what the hope of the Mongo is the Mongo is able to store that very, very compactly and be able to allow you to very quickly get at the data. You don't have to know the path to something. It'll just automatically give you address street, and it'll give you, address zip code. If you've got that as an object, of the address for that context, if it's contact address street, that would be the path. But it'll just show you that as one column, and in ES, like ESS does now for SQL.
So it kind of normalizes it for you on the fly, so to speak. That's an interesting concept. Wow. So we're going to see you again within the year. We'll.
Oh yeah. As soon as they have something out there that people go, what,
Yeah.
But again, even if you never have to look at the JSON in there, people are still saying, I'm not going to use it because, and You can say, no, it's not going to be hard.
Might be missing out on something if they don't adopt it.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, so if you want to understand it, I'll give you this little taste of what it is, but you don't really have to need to know that. You just need to know that you don't need to know. But again, you know, with new things come along, I had just worked in SQL before. So when Mongo was mentioned as being something, I started studying it and knowing that I wouldn't have to, just because I wanted that, you know, how does this work? Why does this work? Why are they using that kind of thing? And be able to satisfy my own curiosity. And again, when questions are come up, I say, look, you know, don't sweat it. It's going to be okay.
Well, we really appreciate you doing that hard work, the digging in and distilling that information for us.
Yeah.
And thanks for staying so late. Some of you on
Sure.
the East Coast, including Beverly in this case. I really appreciate you sticking around and sharing with us, Beverly, everything that
Sure.
you've done so far.